Warm welcome, everyone. Good to see you all for our last webinar in 2024. We're very pleased to have with us today Craig McCorkindale from Australia, who will be speaking to us on the topic Teaching the Bible Cross-Culturally in a Local Language, Benefits and Requirements. Thanks very much, Craig, for availing yourself. And thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Marcus. I'm joining from Cape Town. I'm German. I'm a missiological anthropologist, and I've been living and working here doing research in South Africa for 8 years now. I'm currently doing a postdoc at Stellenbosch University, and I'm engaged with churches in different cultural backgrounds and traditions, and I'm trying to bridge gaps between churches of more Western and those of African traditions. And today I'll be co-hosting the webinar together with Kathy, and she can introduce herself.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. So I am, like Craig, Australian. I've spent most of the last 30 years, though, living in India, working amongst the urban poor in a couple of different big cities there. I'm in Australia at the moment for a short break. So I guess part of our ministry values have been simplicity and servanthood. So we have a lot in common with AVM, with all the ideas of vulnerable mission, but it is still a journey, and I feel like I really get a lot out of these webinars. There's always more to learn, and there's always great discussion. So I'm looking forward to today's session.
Thank you very much. Kathy, just as a hint, I'm not sure if you do the recording. Can you please switch to speaker view if you haven't got the setting right yet? Okay.
Yeah, I have. It still has the, it's on.
Okay, thanks. So for those of you for whom it might be the first webinar with us from the Alliance for Vulnerable Mission, let me briefly introduce what the AVM is about and how we understand vulnerable mission. In the AVM, we acknowledge inequalities that are often part of North-South relationships in church and mission contexts, and some, especially in the academic circles, tend to refer to this as coloniality. But at the same time, we do continue to see mission as an integral part to the church worldwide. It's part of what we are as the church. And so we ask in the AVM how we primarily as Westerners can continue to be involved in mission globally in a way that attenuates some of the power inequalities that we find around us. And we've got two emphases where we try to decrease some of these inequalities and imbalances. One is that we try to focus on using local resources in ministry contexts in order to make whatever happens reproducible locally. And the other focus is using and working in local indigenous vernacular languages. And these languages allow us to get a glimpse of other people's ways of understanding reality and inhabiting the world. And it is in respect of the second emphasis that we host this webinar today. It will be about theological education in a non-Western language in a country that is in Asia, Cambodia, and we'll hear about it. In many ways, probably very different from the country where Craig, our speaker, comes from. So we'll look into that in a moment. Just to explain the structure of the session today, I'll start asking Craig some introductory questions, and then we'll actually have not a talk by him today, but we'll have the webinar we'll run it in an interview format. So I'll be interviewing Craig, and after that, Kathy will take over and she will lead us into a time of breakout groups where we can have some discussion on what was said in smaller groups, and then we come back into the plenary. And this will be an opportunity for questions that arose out of the small groups to ask to Craig, and maybe even to have a discussion among the entire group of us. Yeah, this will be it. So the entire webinar will take maybe 90 minutes or a little bit more, but well under 2 hours. I'd like to pray, and then I'll start asking Craig some questions. Let's pray. Himmlischer Vater, Herr Jesus Christus, Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to meet in this way today. You're truly a global God, and we are meeting from all around the globe today. And we are in different ways involved in serving you. And we always seek to do so in humility. And we know that sometimes it's hard to do that. And we can be so blind to our own biases and whatever we bring with from our homes. And we pray that this webinar today would help us see areas where we can serve people better. We are glad to have Craig with us. We pray that you'd help him explain in clarity what is important for us today. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for your presence among us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Craig, thanks very much for being with us. You join us from Australia, which I understand is your home country.
Yes.
Your family spent 10 years in Cambodia as missionaries. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in Cambodia?
Yeah, and I think there's two parts to this mission journey. There's the kind of facts of how we got to Cambodia, and I guess how we pointed towards there. So we ended up in Cambodia in 2017, but we first started thinking about mission in 2005. So yeah, about 10 years before we got there. And for my wife and I at that point, Sam, we thought we felt a call to mission, and that was in the early phases. But then I was midway through a physio degree, so I finished my physiotherapy degree. I worked as a physio, went to Bible college, and all this time we were thinking mission, but hadn't really made the call yet for that. At the end of Bible college, we were still thinking mission, but then the organization CMS, Church Missionary Society, that we were thinking we'd go with said, we were talking about whether it would be whether getting some experience in parish, in church ministry before we go was part of that, and some extra study, and that's what we decided to do. So that kind of took us from, I guess, in 2012, we started church ministry in Australia to get some experience, and then extra ministry study. And I think once I finished the master's, we applied with CMS and started thinking about Cambodia. So that's kind of that was a 10-year process in terms of the facts. I think it was, in the early days, it was a call, like it was I guess a need, or seeing the need overseas and how we could help. And I think in that early days, it was, I'm not sure how, but through Bible college and serving in a church, I thought teaching in a Bible college was probably where God was calling and leading us. So that was kind of the end part of our mission journey. And then as we applied with CMS, we were the sort of missionaries. We weren't the missionaries who were like, oh, this is the location we're going to go to, we just don't know what we're going to do there. We were the missionaries, which is, we feel called to this role, we don't know where. And then CMS said, well, here's a few ideas. And actually, as we narrowed them down, Cambodia became the, I guess, the location that Sam and I both felt would work for our family, and so part of that calling missionary journey there. So that's kind of a 10-year process of, you know, lots of different things happening in our lives, and also then a clarifying of that role of what it would look like. So then Cambodia was really only the last step in terms of that, you know, 10-year process.
Yeah, so maybe I got it wrong. I thought you spent 10 years in Cambodia, but you only got there in 2017. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So it was 7 years in Cambodia, and a 10-year process beforehand. Yeah, yeah.
Did I know that in some circles, mission from wealthy Western countries in the global South is sometimes regarded with suspicion today. Did that play any role in your thinking about going into mission, and maybe even the place considering where you might end up?
Yeah, look, I like this question. Actually, it was I think if I thought back to that first missionary call, it was this sense of, we have these wonderful resources in Australia, Bible schools and whatever. I don't think the suspicion thing came into my thinking at that point. I think as I trained for mission in Melbourne as part of CMS at St Andrews Hall, that was where I came across a vulnerable mission. And I think the premise of vulnerable mission really resonated with me. So I think for me, I was probably, I think, you know, grew up in Australian culture where Christianity was treated with suspicion anyway, like in a sense. So for me, that was, whether I was here in Australia or overseas somewhere, that suspicion part, it didn't really prevent me or propel me, but it was certainly, it certainly shaped me. I think it's part of, you know, how I do ministry now. With that suspicion really as a key part.
So bringing in vulnerability is then also maybe already a way of thinking how to respond to such suspicion, right?
I think so. I think it was really that it was, maybe it was a reflex move of, you know, you can sense this, you can see the mission history and the trajectory that's taken. And so whilst still seeing the place for church and mission and ministry, all right, so what mode does that take? I think it's dealing with the suspicion, and I think, you know, vulnerable mission was I was, you know, it resonated with the way I like to do mission and ministry as well.
So we are going to focus on language today, and in that, I'd like to use the first part, looking a little bit into your process of language learning in Cambodia, and the second part, we'll consider more the impact that this language learning had. So in today's world, a lot of people work internationally. Whether people be people from global north or global south or east and west, wherever. But especially Westerners, when they go and in such a, let's say, in a servant role, be it in development or mission, very often, I don't have any numbers, but I can see that very often one of the things that enables them to go relatively quickly is a global language that they may have already learned. See it here in South Africa. Someone sharing with me that South Africa is a great place for mission from a Western country because there's no need to language learn because people will already be able to understand me through English. Now, you, contrary to many other people, you chose to actually learn the language spoken locally, Khmer. And yeah, I don't know, but I presume it's probably not the easiest language to learn for a native English speaker. So what was your motivation? Why did you do that?
Yeah, look, I think, and it's hard, it probably drills down to, and I don't think I would have articulated like this earlier on, but I think my ministry model and subsequently, how I worked as a missionary was very much relational. And I think language is key to that. And I think for me, it was if I'm going to be in a new place and I'm wanting to, I guess, share or build that relationship, language was the key. And so for me, that was a driver there. Like I think when I'm making friendships, it's learning their local language, even though it's English. But I think I just changed that over to Khmer, and I think that was really then supported by my by CMS as well. Like they were really want to send long term, want to the idea that you want people in their heart language to hear the good news and to be able to respond in that way. I think there was just a real onus, and it was always just the key, the first thing or the primary thing of my mission activity was always going to be mission. I think if we were going to do long term, it was through learning the local. So it was kind of, for me, there was and there's lots of ways to do mission, but for me it was very much it's going to be through learning the local language. So it was kind of a non-negotiable. Yeah.
How would you describe Khmer as a language?
Interesting. I mean, Sarah's there as well, so she may have actually when I was doing missionary training, Sarah was speaking at a Khmer church there in Melbourne, and hearing her translate was quite inspiring. So she might have more insights there. Look, I just Googled this as well. The Khmer language is apparently the largest alphabet in the world. So it has 33 consonants, 23 vowels, which, as Sarah will know, there's two ways you can say those vowels. So that's kind of doubling those vowel sounds. And there's another 12 independent vowels. So the Khmer language is wonderful and foreign, as any language is. Some of the complexities of it is it's written without breaks. So I guess more ancient languages like Greek and Hebrew, where there's no gaps between the words, vowels go above, below, either side. So you're having to learn the words, and once you learn the words, you can pick out how they fit together. So that's the written side of things. And then the spoken side of things is then another mess, because you have quite a street Khmer, and then what you would call more royal or formal Khmer, and it's almost two different languages at that point, because they just use different terms for everything. So you then when you're in regular conversation, you're saying one thing, but then when you're speaking more formally, there's a whole nother side of things. So I think for me it was a challenge. I had learned Greek and Hebrew at college, and so I'd liked language learning, and so the idea of learning Khmer didn't throw me off, but it was certainly.
But how did you go about? What were maybe some stages in your language learning, and how much time did it involve for you?
Yep. Yeah. Well, and there's also the expectations about where I thought I'd be before I learned that. So, you have these ideas about learning language and where you'll be. For me, language learning started with G2K, which was a language school set up by an OMF missionary. And from that was a year of full-time language learning. So 3 hours every morning, which I'd, ride my bike to, and then had homework to. And there's lots of missionaries who come in Cambodia and try and do ministry and then learn language on top. And I found that just doing language was hard enough. So that was, it had to be the sole, focus for me. So it was a year of that language school. And then after that,
Sorry, excuse me. Can I just
Yeah.
ask, did you do that on your own, or did it involve members of your family as well, the language learning in the school?
Yeah, so both my wife and I attended the school, but she attended part-time, partly because of, looking after children, and it was a good 30, 40 minutes away from our house, the school. So I went there full-time. Sam went there part-time. I'll digress to the kids and then I'll come back to myself.
Yeah, okay.
Early on, so for the kids, we wanted our whole family to be immersed, and this is, kind of, we were hoping to, get all involved. The short story is we found it really hard with our kids, making friends and them learning language when they were speaking to when our kids were speaking to other Khmer kids, they were actually speaking English. And so our kids found it hard to, they just didn't get the chance to pick up the local language. And we just really, in the city, found it tricky to live in a way that our kids could both have, pick up the language and, but also kind of feel settled. So by the end of the 3 years, our first 3 years, we had kind of given up on our kids learning Khmer. Now, if they did, that's great, but we weren't pushing it. So we kind of came to the point where if our kids love Cambodia but don't know Khmer, that was a win for us, regardless of the fact that I think that language is key. So it was kind of this split. If you want to talk about this at some other point, but family became, there was family life and then my ministry life. And so in terms of family, we had to kind of deal with that reality that they weren't able to dig into language in the same way that I'd hoped or we thought. But then for myself, what we found in those 3 years was we found a way in which we could live in Cambodia and I could still learn language and kind of continue on. But it wasn't kind of that initial thought of where we'd do it all together, immersed and kind of So that was our family story. For me, the language classes took about a year and 18 months to get through, 15 months to get through. So that was the formal learning. And Sarah might be able to speak to this more as well, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot of formal structures of how to learn Khmer outside of that year. And can I just say, after a year, as a when you've got a family and then I'm trying to learn language, my Khmer after a year was pretty small. So there's some missionaries who I hear go to Spain or something like that and they're preaching after 6 months, and after a year of language learning, I was still scared just to even have a conversation. So it was really slow going, and that was part of the learning the expectations of the time. I think after that, so a friend of mine, another missionary in Cambodia, had a interesting perspective on learning Khmer, which when you think about like Mandarin or Arabic, there's millions of those speakers. And so you can think about the resources that are built up for learning that language, not just in that, from the early stages, but through and post that. There's lots of resources with Khmer, because only, 20 million people speak it, or not even that. Once you get outside of this year that I had, language learning became, you very much got to, do it on your own. And I think that adds to the complexity of it. For me, what that meant was some individual, just trying to expand my ability to speak, read, write, all those different things. But at the same time, the Bible school was knew I was heading towards teaching there. And so there was this real tug of war with, hey, I'm here to learn the language, but also I'm here to teach. And so after about a year and a half, my language learning was really like, all right, do I give this teaching a go, or do I continue to learn the language? And that was probably the next stage for language learning for me, was actually jumping into teaching before I was really ready for it. But actually, on reflection, it was actually the perfect tool for language learning. Was actually
how's that? How's that?
A number of reasons. I think partly I'd come from a good theological background, so I didn't have to kind of then try and make up my theology as I went along, and I was trying to get teaching tools. But I think for me, because my theology in teaching was decent, even though my Khmer was weak, I could kind of prop it up. I had a translator with me in the classroom in that. So after about 18 months, I was attempting to teach Old Testament to the students. What that meant was a whole lot of background work, but I was trying to use my my language in those early days. But that very process of trying to teach actually then helped me to learn the language more. So I think
excuse me. Going into teaching at this stage didn't mean that you just gave up on Khmer, but you tried to use it as much as possible and used English at the side?
Yes, yeah. So a missionary friend of mine said, when you start teaching, if at all possible, start in the local language rather than start teaching in English being translated and then move over, because it's very difficult to do that. So I took his advice, and those early days. So just to give you an example, I'd teach a 3-hour lecture on the Old Testament. So here's some context. It was to students who are about 18 to 20. So, kind of young adult age. Their high school equivalency was, kind of mid-high school in terms of their ability there. So I used a very kind of Bible project sort of, map out a different book or something like that to talk about the Old Testament. But my week before I taught was about 30 hours. And in that 30 hours, I would write out my notes in English. I would then translate them into Khmer myself, because I couldn't read the Khmer textbooks at that point, after a year and a half. And so I'd write out some very simple Khmer lessons on the Old Testament, and then my translator would come in and, make it a bit more natural sounding. So then I'd take his script and then put it into some sort of activity, so it's not just me speaking, and that, and that was a 30-hour process that I'd just do week after week for my first year. So that was, and actually that it really improved my Khmer. Like, it improved my, I worked hard on my typing and my reading, and so as a result, it was language learning while I was teaching. So it happened to be this, like, and this isn't the case everywhere, or like, I know lots of people who where their ministries are in English but they want to learn. So that's fair enough. But it just happened to be that my ministry and language learning were able to be combined, and I think
Yeah.
that was a real blessing of the situation. I think that's that. As I look back at my language learning, it was actually teaching that then helped my language, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah, interesting. What impact did you feel your language learning had did it have on the relationships with the people locally, be it in your inside and outside the classroom, and maybe even respect of your ability to understand theology from people's own perspective?
yeah. I'll start with relationships. Like I think the fact that I was willing to give Khmer a go and
Mm,
work in that said a lot. I think it's still like it's a um I think it meant a lot to them that I was learning their language and giving it a go. So I think for me it was a wonderful way of serving them or meeting
mm,
them, kind of where they're at. So I think that was the major impact in the early days. Part of the early days was actually it kind of took me 3 years before I felt confident to have a proper conversation even with my students. So yeah, the impact in the early days was I'm giving this a go, but
mm,
how much understanding is, or how much we can relate is different. But I think as it went along, you could see the impact when I moved from not only giving it a go, but being able to converse and have conversations. So I remember distinctly in that first year, I hated question time because um, it was, I had to go off script.
yeah.
And whereas by 3 to 5 years, I'd got enough confidence that actually I'd, yeah, discussions and question time were actually part of the lesson, and
Mm,
so that was the impact, was this growing relationship where we could move from me not just sharing stuff, but actually conversing and relating and building upon each other. So I think the impact was in those early days was they saw that I was really invested, but the
yeah.
impact as it went along was um a cooperation or working
Mm,
together that was, wouldn't have been there if I had just been speaking English, I don't think. Yeah.
yeah. What I know very little about Cambodia. What was the situation like in your classroom? Was there generally a desire by the students to learn good English that sometimes incapacitates someone coming in from the outside who wants to learn the local language? Or did they just appreciate you using Khmer and then go along with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my interaction was um after about a year of learning Khmer, um I switched very quickly from interacting with the students in English through to Khmer, because actually probably even after that year, my Khmer was better than their English. Like, and yeah,
Mm,
that's
mm,
not me. That's not me trying to big note myself. That's more just the resources of my, yeah, Australian education, plus the
mm,
resources that CMS throws into me learning the language means that I could get much further in Khmer than they
mhm,
had in English. So
mm,
for me, um, they they weren't really confident in using English that much. So it
mm,
actually made much more sense to
yeah,
work in Khmer in that sense. And so I never really felt this pull with my students. However, as I went along, there was this sort of, I guess, my staff or those who were a bit more progressing, that there was this, sometimes we'd flip between. So with my students, it was much more clear. It was, you know, they didn't have the confidence, and I guess as teacher as well, teacher-student relationship, there was this barrier. But so for me it was, and then Khmer was just there wasn't really I guess a sense of using anything else. Yeah.
Teaching in the local language and spending all these hours in preparation, do you feel there were aspects about the Bible and how you read and understand the Bible that changed because you were able to take on different perspective on the text from your students' perspectives in Khmer?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the sadnesses is that the subjects that I was involved with were a bit more theology related rather than exegesis. So the amount of time I was able to spend in the Bible wasn't as much as I would have liked. Coming from my background, we had heavy exegesis subjects, so I was used to that in English, but I never kind of quite got that in. So my interaction with the Cambodian, I guess, Bible was on the lesser side. But one of the standout, I guess, discussions that I had that has really left a mark was as I talked with students about Jesus and him being both God and man. There was a real interaction in the Khmer language where when you speak about God, you use the royal language, and when you speak about man, you use, you know, a bit more kind of street language. And so how do you then talk about Jesus, who is both, you know, using the royal language, but then, you know, as a man? So one example is when Jesus eats or walks or sleeps, that verb is different from when we walk or sleep, or and so one of the lasting impacts, I think, from me learning Khmer was actually wrestling with how do you deal with his humanity and his divinity, given that English, we those they use the same words, whereas in Khmer, Jesus, because he's God, he uses, he sleeps in a different way. And so one of my favorite discussions in, my topic about Jesus was actually, all right, what, is it, which language do which words do you use? Do you use the royal language to emphasize his, his being God, but that actually hides his humanity? Or do you use his humanity, kind of emphasize his humanity, but actually that's kind of hiding his divinity? And in a culture with about respect and honor, like, is that downgrading him? So I never really got to the bottom of that sort of conundrum, but it stuck with me as that weirdness of Jesus being both God and man was really represented in the Khmer language in a way that English smooths that over a little bit.
Yeah. Fascinating.
The strangeness of Jesus was actually then, it stuck with me more.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. I mean, working in different language also implies working or relating differently because it's in a different cultural context. So did you also have to change your style of teaching as you were operating in another language?
Yeah, I did. I think Khmer is, like, from my experience, Khmer people are much more happy to talk about things and less comfortable reading things. And so there's this real, I guess, in the classroom, how much are you trying to help them in their reading and comprehension, and how much are you discussing things? So I think for me, by the end of the 5 years, I was doing a lot more stuff verbally or as the first thing, and then moving on to reading. So I think it kind of flipped. I in the beginning, I think I would have given them stuff to read and then talked about it, but actually by the end, it was much more, let's talk about this, and that's the first bite of the cherry. And then when they have context, then move on to reading, which is, they've already thought about the topic first in conversation and really discussed it. So I think for me, it was, which I think is probably slightly different. Yeah, it's kind of back to front from what we did in Australia, where you read first and then discuss.
Yeah,
And actually in the Khmer classroom, we were discussing first, and then that helps their reading later.
Yeah, very interesting. In hindsight, to what extent would you say your language learning was preparation for your ministry, or it was already part of your ministry?
Yeah, no, I'd say it was part and parcel. Like it was the core part of it. I think it was like there was that year or 2 years where you would say it was preparation, but even after 7 years, language learning still continues. And I think, after 20 years. And so I think I would say it's more a core feature rather than something that you leave behind. It's more it revitalizes, actually. The more I learn about the Khmer language, the better my teaching is. So that there's a sense in which it's this fire that just kind of fuels it on.
I'd like to ask one last question, and I hope I won't come across as offensive, but you've shared with us how you did a lot of work. I mean, you said it's all part and parcel of your ministry, but you did spend significant time investing in getting your head around a totally different way of thinking and speaking and so forth and relating with people. So you've laid a foundation and you invested a lot into that in order to be able to relate to people on their terms. In the end, after 7 years, you said you decided with your family to not build on that further and to build on the foundation that you laid, but to return to Australia. Would you mind sharing the reasons for that? And maybe how you look back on that time, how it fits into the rest of God's journey with you in your life?
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I don't find that offensive at all. Yeah, look, I think when we first went with CMS, we were thinking 10 years, so that was kind of a rough time frame. And I think that was partly given that we knew that Khmer would take a while to learn and require that significant investment. I think my reflection is that we make plans and God has better ideas, and so I think that's one aspect of it, is that I think we felt like after the 7 years it was right for us to return as a family, despite kind of I guess the way I was seeing is, if we were going back to Cambodia again, we'd be there right now. This was kind of my I forget the phrase, but you do the hard work, and then this was the payoff term, in a sense. Like, I think there was really a sense in which we'd done the early hard yards of language learning, and these next 3 or 4 years, if we'd been there, would have been the payoff. So I think there there was that view of language learning and that we were hoping to reach. And I think in God's wisdom and as we talked with CMS, we thought that actually our initial plans of being there for the 10, were actually probably not the best idea. And so coming back early. So there is a sense in which we invested a lot of time and still wrestling through what that means. As well as, I think I look back and I kind of go, well, look, all right, I didn't get my payoff term, but actually those 5 years or 7 years that we did where I was interacting and sharing God's, being able to serve alongside, people at Phnom Penh Bible School, that was a wonderful blessing. And I think God was still working through that, even without me having to, be perfect in my Khmer. So there's a real sense in which he works through our weakness. And so sometimes even, greater than we think through the weakness rather than through the strength. So there's that reflection. I think when we decided to make the decision to come back, it was never really we're done with Cambodia sort of thing. It was always we need to be back here, even though Cambodia is still a part of me. So I actually got a tattoo of a Khmer phrase here on my shoulder when we went back for the last time. But there was a real sense in which we were never actually done with Cambodia. Even though our family is living here, and it just so happens as we couldn't have guessed this, but God has blessed us that the ministry role that I have ended up in, the church said, yep, we want you still going back to Cambodia, on a yearly basis. And so so I go back and I'm heading back in January to teach intensive, and that will be, I hope, a yearly thing. It's actually in my contract, so it's more than a hope. But I think there's a sense in which for me, so I'm still doing my my vocab every day. I don't know what you guys use for language learning, but I use this app called Anki, which is a Japanese vocab program. And so Deb uses as well. So I still look at Anki every day in Khmer, and I've got a deck of about 4,000 words there that I run through. So for me, our family is located here, but my language learning journey in Khmer is still progressing. And so the post reflection is that actually those 7 years were foundation building is kind of my the post analysis. And in God's, like, it didn't have to be. He could have said, he could have closed the door and said that's the end for you with Cambodia, and we would have had to deal with that. But in his mercy and in his wisdom, he's provided a way for, I guess, that those years to keep building on. So I kind of feel like I'm just starting to I get into that sense of language learning where I'm moving past the learning lots of new words and actually digging into the culture much over the next. So I feel like I'm just moving into the next language learning phase. That's kind of it's a beginning.
Thanks very much thus far. Thanks for sharing about how you learned, how you got to Cambodia, and what you experienced there. So I'm sure there's so much more to hear, and maybe in the after breakout groups we will have we'll be able to hear a little bit more depending on what questions people bring. I'd now like to hand over to Kathy, who will take over from here.
Okay, thank you very much. That's been so many interesting little pieces, Craig, for us to latch onto and discuss in our breakout rooms. So I'm going to set up a couple of breakout rooms, and everybody should see something appear on their screen, an invitation to go to the breakout room. And if you click that, hopefully that will work. So the idea in the breakout rooms is to discuss a couple of things. You could begin by introducing yourself to each other, where you are, something, the 30-second version of where you are and what kind of ministry you're involved in. And then maybe something from the interview and what Craig has said that inspired you or intrigued you. So something that you found inspiring. And then also if there's anything, questions that it's raised for you. So when we come back from the breakout rooms, there'll be an opportunity to ask any further questions, or you could also just share some insights from your group conversation. Would anybody from group 1 like to tell us any of the insights that you're discussing, or ask a question to Craig? Did you appoint a speaker, a spokesperson?
Are we group 1? I wasn't sure which group. The one with Deborah.
It's your group now.
Okay. So I have been appointed to share. I guess there were 2 sort of main things that we were talking about. It just so happens that Rob and myself, both of us serve in Cambodia as well. So it was very interesting to hear Craig share about how, the question of what language we use when we refer to Jesus, whether we use the monastic royal language or do we use the everyday language. So we were just discussing both in the urban and in the rural setting, whether the people, the lay people, how much do they actually understand of the monastic language, right? And or royal language. And I think generally, there was some kind of agreement that most people will at least know something, right? So, but we were also wondering what it would feel for the Cambodian if we were to refer to Jesus in everyday language. What would they think about who Jesus is? So that was something that we talked about. And the other thing we briefly talked about as well was the whole idea of how learning Cambodian and knowing the Cambodian worldview enriches our understanding of God and enriches even our theologies. And also, for example, one example would be having a more communal understanding of even the theology of salvation, rather than having an individualistic theology of it's my decision. It is, it's a personal, individual decision to become a Christian. What would a household theology then look like? So that was just briefly what we shared.
Wow. Thank you, Claire. That sounds like a great discussion. It's amazing the things that do. We get to ask new questions when we're dealing with a different language, or the grammar of a different language just throws up different problems about how we talk about God, or what people understand when we use these words. Yeah. Would you like to respond to any of that, Craig?
Yeah, look, I think there was, that communal thought, how the communal life of, Cambodia shapes our thought of salvation, I think was, for me, that really hit home in the way they do prayer. So I don't know, Claire, if you experienced this, but when I was in Cambodian churches, when they pray together, they all pray at the same time, and everyone's speaking. Whereas coming from my background, one person prays and everyone listens and agrees. And so I think there was, even just in that act of prayer, that everyone joining in that community, I think really speaks that aspect of salvation, and shows it in different ways. And that was, yeah, tricky for me to get used to it, yeah, in the beginning. But I think they're really, yeah, kind of, yeah, in a new culture, the gospel, different aspects of the gospel, yeah, certainly comes to light there. And I think, yeah, the trick with the languages on, a lot of regular Cambodian people wouldn't understand the royal language, and so there is a sense in which actually, if you do use it, yeah, maybe they're not going to understand it, but then, yeah, if you're talking about a man, yeah, it's just really tricky, isn't it? Just
yeah. Yep. Okay, thank you. Somebody from group 2, the other group.
I think I would be the representative for the other group. So I guess we mainly focused about like the actual language learning, and yeah, we thought it was really good how Craig brought up the whole thing about expectations and timelines. Various ones of us had some experience regarding that, feeling like, you go to language school for a whole year and you should feel fluent, But it's actually a very different reality. And then the ongoing learning, and then the idea of like, how long should you spend on just learning before you actually then start trying to teach or really engage in ministry? Because I mean, it can be that concept that like, well, you have to, really be fluent before then you can start learning. But yeah, it was great. Thank you, Craig, for showing how like even within like the thrust of having to get into ministry, you have a choice of whether you can make it a fuel to your language learning or actually prevent you from language learning. Because you could just go, okay, well, I'm not fluent enough, so everything will be done through the interpreter, and that's the end of your language learning. Whereas that was great, Craig. And then, but actually, one thing that kind of made us laugh was, so when you're learning language, you make mistakes all the time, and we have was that a quote from SIL about making 10,000 mistakes? No, it's not a quote, but the concept that like supposed to go out and make 10,000 mistakes and then learn from that and make another 10,000. But when you're talking about, teaching theology in a Bible school, I suspect, Craig, you might have a few interesting stories to tell about miscommunication.
Yes.
And what impact that sort of thing has.
Yeah. Oh, look, my favorite story was in the very early days. I tried some of my teaching out on a church out in Koh Kong, so out in one of the provinces, and at the end of the weekend, the pastor sat me down in front of the church, and he said to me, he said, your Khmer is very unclear. And he says, your drawings are like kids' drawings. But your teaching is good. We got your point. And there was this sense in which there was this, working through my language mistakes there. Like I was it was very obvious that I was unable to communicate, that I was able to communicate well. I wasn't able to do that. And so that was kind of, my language ability was very much on show there in those early days, just really just those mistakes, and like that was I guess in a group setting. And then like you go to the different things where you're talking about 10,000 real, but you call it a chicken mine. So like just use various different words there, or you mess up, or I can't remember what. It took me a while to remember what hogs up. How many hogs it was. So in terms of 60. So I think those little mistakes that you're doing, and then there's probably a million others that you don't know that you're doing that. That you never see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
which just reminds. Sorry, go on, Sarah.
thing was, the whole idea of like, our goal is to be fluent in the language, but then there's the reality that even when we are fluent, it doesn't actually fix all the relational problems or the communication problems, because then there's the whole way of the culture that, and even like, so for me, being in Cambodia for a very long time, I feel like I'm quite fluent in culture as well, but I still don't live it like they live it. And so there's still always, some difficulties that just, knowing the right words and that kind of thing doesn't really fix.
That's right. There's a real rub. Like, we can put almost too much weight on language, but actually there's still going to be a rub whether we have the language or not, or just a difference. Yeah, I remember a preacher that I really looked up to. He'd been living in Pakistan for 12 years, and in English he was a great preacher, and he said his ability in, I think, Urdu is the language in Pakistan, was always about a quarter of his ability to preach in English. And so it stuck with me that just even after being immersed in a language, like, just still the capacity, there's still a weakness, a vulnerability working in that second language, and whether it's culture or the words, or just and just that stuck with me, that no matter how proficient we get, that's still
Yeah. And I guess at some level our aim is to become proficient in language, but I guess the aim behind that really is to humbly relate to people in a deep and make deep connections with people that lead them towards Jesus, or lead them in their life of following.
Absolutely. And like Sarah was saying, there is, even with all the language, you're still going to get those points at which things don't sit the same or sit well, and that's the clash of culture, the clash of the gospel.
Would anybody like? Jim.
Yeah, thanks again, Craig, for sharing that with us. And I mean, once you learn the language, I mean, if you're at a Bible school, say there's 10 faculty at the Bible school, the chances are you don't all get on great anyway, even if you're Australians. Now, so I was going to say, how did you get on? Were there other Westerners at the same school? And then were you competing on, I don't know how to say it, Khmer? Were they envious, or were they praising? Because missionaries can be envious of each other. If one person can just fluently use the language, the others who can't get it may not be very happy with that. They may prefer you to use English. And then another thing with the students, I've known SIL people come in Tanzania and use teaching theology as a way of learning language. Now I kind of thought, oh, well, that's a bit hard on the students, that they have to put up with you using them as language tutors when they're trying to learn theology. Do you think there's some weight in that, or how do you look at it?
Two good questions. The first one, in terms of the other foreigners at the Bible school, there was one guy who had come in, and he didn't have the chance to learn language, I guess, in the same way as I had. So he was through a translator, and he was a lovely, godly guy, and I don't think my language ability kind of got to him in that point. There was another guy who came in after me who learned the language, I think, even probably quicker than I did. And so there was, I did feel a little bit a pang of, you know, when I could see him use it better. Yeah, there was a little bit of let's call it godly competition, where it did spur me on to press on there. But look, I think we were really lucky at the Bible school. There was only 2 or 3 of us, and we got on well, and the relationship outside of that language stuff probably buffered the language differences. In terms of in terms of teaching theology as a way to learn language, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a way in which you can come in and that can be unhelpful in terms of if the students can't get the idea of what you're teaching, or then that's probably too soon. And there was a teacher at the Bible school who he tried to begin too early and was asked to move into English, which would be then translated so that because the students couldn't understand him. So I think there is a wisdom in which, when to start teaching in theology. And I think there is I think you're right. There is a too soon sort of moment, or maybe you're not a teacher. You shouldn't be a teacher. Whether it was teaching ability or language ability, I think there's a rightness to, if that's not the timing or gifting. Absolutely. Yeah.
And congratulations to the people running the Bible school, that they knew when to give some guidance about.
Yes, that's right. The principal of the Bible school, he's Cambodian, but he studied in Australia twice, and he's really doing a wonderful job of steering that ship.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
I just asked Craig, what are you doing now? Are you a tutor at a Bible college in Australia? Or?
We came back, and we weren't really sure what we were going to do. We made the decision to settle in a location that was close to family, and I thought that actually that location didn't have a lot of ministry roles available. It ended up being that there was an Anglican church near us that about 3 months after we landed needed a minister, and so I've gone on to the ministry team at an Anglican church near us, and part of that contract was to then come back to Cambodia once a year. So the church that I'm working for is paying for me to go back to Cambodia once a year for a week or 2 to do that. So in church ministry with this time in Cambodia as well.
Great. Thank you. Any other last questions? We're hitting midnight in Craig's time zone. Okay, so we might just switch now to a couple of little announcements about what else is coming up. Let's see. So AVM holds these webinars 4 times a year, every 3 months. So the next one will be coming up in January, and you can see they're already organised for the rest of next year coming up. So the next one is here, Learning Over Power, Moving Beyond Cross-Cultural Competency to Cultural Humility. So that feels like it's a very good follow-on from some of the discussion we've just been having. Anyway, so you can sign up for that through the Eventbrite website, where you will have signed up for this one, or you can also go to the website, the Vulnerable Mission website. That's actually being kind of relaunched. A whole new website will be launching soon if you go to that URL. And from that website, you can sign up for the webinars, and you can also sign up for the newsletter that comes out regularly. It's always lots of good article stubs and interesting events and insights in the newsletter. I highly recommend that you sign up for that. And that's about it for tonight. So thank you all for joining. I'll just close in prayer, I guess, unless there's any other comments. I think we're all good. Okay. Thank you so much, Father, for this time that we can have together, the wonders that modern technology enables, and the wonder of your presence with us wherever we are, whatever time it is, and for the sometimes surprising ways you lead us in our lives and enable us in our ministry. And we pray for your grace and peace, especially for Craig and his family as they continue the journey of resettling in Australia, and for each of us as we continue our different ministry roles wherever they are. Thanks again for the great input and discussions we've been able to have tonight, and for the fellowship that we enjoy. Amen.
Amen.
Have I missed anything, Marcus?
No, that's perfect.
All good. Very good. Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, God bless.
Thank you very much.
Take care of them.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.